Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. This is not a routine teach-in gathering. We're convening in the wake of an unprecedented crisis. Over the past week, Israel and Iran edged the world to the brink of a regional war, and for the very first time in decades, the United States became a direct participant in military escalation against Iran. Now we're entering a fragile ceasefire phase. But let's be very clear. The ceasefire is not peace. It is a pause at the edge of a catastrophe, and everything depends on what we do next. Just days ago, the United States launched a coordinated strike on Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz. These were not surgical, these were not defensive, they were unauthorized acts of war, ordered without a single vote in Congress, without public consent, and in violation of both domestic and international law. This is not just a breach of the War Powers Resolution, it is a profound betrayal of the Constitution and people of this country. And we cannot ignore what preceded it. Israel, already carrying out a devastating military campaign and a genocide in Gaza, launched a deeply provocative strike deep inside of Iran, killing over hundreds of people, including civilians, nuclear scientists, and top IRGC commanders. That strike came just before the US and Iran were set to resume negotiations on re entering the Iran nuclear deal. Diplomacy was within reach, but it was derailed, sabotage by a deliberate escalation. And then the US joined the assault. Iran responded with the drone and missile attacks against Israeli cities, and in the dramatic escalation, struck a U.S. military base in Qatar just today. There were casualties, there was loss, and there's grief on every side. So, yes, we do have a ceasefire in place, but the cost of this war, human, environmental, political, are already devastating. And they will be felt by civilians across the region, not only in Iran, but in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Israel, and amongst US service members and their families. In this war, if this war reignites, it could spiral into something far greater, possibly even a nuclear confrontation. A war launched without a debate, without democratic oversight, without legal authorization. So the question before us stands tonight: what can we do? We must refuse to be bystanders. We must speak out for peace, for justice, and for a foreign policy rooted in human dignity, not endless wars. And tonight, we will hear from our esteemed panel of speakers: Jeffrey Sperling, Dr. Sina Azodi, Dr. Peter Kuznick, and Khury Petersen-Smith. My name is Hanieh Jodat. I am from Defuse Nuclear War, the co-chair of No War with Iran campaign, and Rootsaction. Please join me in welcoming our very first speaker, Jeffrey Sterling, who is a former CIA case officer who served on the agency's Iran task force for nearly a decade. After filing an employment discrimination suit against the CIA, he was persecuted under the Espionage Act and served for 2.5 years in prison, despite no incriminating evidence being presented at trial. Sterling continues to profess his innocence and advocates for whistleblower protections. He is the author of Unwanted Spy: The Persecution of an American Whistleblower. Jeffrey, we welcome you tonight. And I just want to ask you, from your firsthand experience, how was the intelligence community shaped in this current crisis with Iran? Are we seeing echoes of the past covert interventions now playing out in the open?
I think thank you for having me. I think what we've been seeing as, again, here we go, um, with aggression touted as being necessary to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. I think this has all been part of a game plan that unfortunately I was a part of while I was at the CIA. A very dangerous and irresponsible escalation with Iran is just furtherance of that game plan. Speaking of intelligence, none of the rhetoric, none of the narrative about Iran and nuclear weapons is based on or has anything to do with real intelligence, literally and figuratively. Intelligence about Iran and nuclear weapons was lacking when I was at the agency. And I imagine that to still be the case today. I mean, if there is good intelligence, why bombing is the act of a desperate person, if you ask me. But the same claims that Iran is on the brink of having nuclear weapons were being made over 20 years ago when Operation Merlin was thought of and executed. That operation turns out was really a perfect vehicle to plant evidence that would further the propaganda and rhetoric against Iran, as opposed to its proffered goal of thwarting Iran's development of nuclear weapons. The current claims are no different. And of course, we've seen this all before with the buildup to and the invasion of Iraq. It's the same game plan. Build a rhetoric, feign immediate danger, and act on it, feeling completely justified. In fact, before I was removed from Operation Merlin and the agency, um, the idea was expressed to me about that operation that if it worked against Iran, it could work against another I in the region. I, of course, being the letter I. That I think encapsulates the approach that this country has made towards the Middle East and particularly to Iran. It's all part of the game plan. It's not there's no aspect of let's seek out peace or real negotiations. It's all about war. It's all about aggression. We're seeing that heavy-handed, arrogant approach play out right now. So, as I think about it, just from my experiences, what is next? So we bombed Iran, Israel the same. It's like, well, what is the goal? What is the end plan? End game? More bombings after the supposed ceasefire takes effect. And as I think about it, and from my years of experience in working and learning about Iran and our approach to Iran, I think it not unreasonable for anyone to ask, why shouldn't Iran develop a nuclear weapon? Now, I'm not saying that they should or that they will choose to do so. But as old as the accusation is, you would think by now they would have developed a nuclear arsenal and let the whole world know about it. But we have been, as much as we claim that we don't want them to have nuclear weapons, it seems like what alternative does Iran have? Particularly as the US and Israel, both nuclear powers, by the way, have been pushing Iran in that direction for years through oppressive sanctions, false claims of development, and isolation in a game plan that has been unrelenting for decades. So, what choice does Iran have? Nuclear weapons or not? The International Atomic Energy Agency says that there's no proof that Iran is working towards the development of nuclear weapons, yet the accusations remain. A non-nuclear weapon Iran doesn't fit the narrative. The U.S. leaving the JCPOA, U.S. and Israel feigning negotiation while preparing for attack. Iran has at least shown given the appearance of wanting to negotiate, wanting to return to the international community. But again, a negotiating Iran does not fit the narrative of the game plan. So, what choice then does the U.S. have? Despite what we've been told, the U.S. has always had a choice in the region and a choice about Iran. The game plan has been there. It just needed someone with no regard for reality to put it into motion. And that's what we've been seeing. And just on a personal side, I'll say that, I was part of that propaganda machine. I was fed by it. I fed into it. And maybe my criticisms of it now may be considered hypocritical by some, but I saw how dangerous it was not only for Iran, the Middle East, but also for this country. Are we a country of just warmongers? Is that the legacy? Will we continue to fall on the wrong side of history with regard to this? I think the only way is for our politicians to be awoken and see the fallacy of just using claims of unverified claims of nuclear weapon or even planned operations to continue a rhetoric that they're not for the betterment of this country. They have nothing to do with our national security. And unconstitutional moves like this must be challenged. Um, again, yes, there's a ceasefire supposedly, but um, is that also part of the game plan? So that's just wanted to give a little insight as to possibly how we got here. Um, maybe where we go next.
Right. Thank you, Jeffrey. And I think for many of us who've been exposed to the propaganda machine here in the US for decades now, we do understand that, the negotiations with Iran have been sabotaged time and time and time again. And guess what country does have nuclear weapons? Israel, right? And guess what they've been doing for the past 2 years? Carrying on a campaign of genocide against Palestinians, right? And they are not the signatories to the NPT. So this is why this is a beautiful way for us to segue into our next part of the program, where we will hear from Professor Peter Kuznick, who is a historian, educator, and activist. He founded the Nuclear Studies Institute American University and has led educational exchanges with survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He is the co-author with Oliver Stone of The Untold History of the United States, a best-selling book and documentary series. Dr. Kuznick has collaborated with international leaders, including former Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatomoya, and was nominated for the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize. Professor, welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. With the U.S. striking Iranian nuclear sites just days before Israel's airstrikes, how close are we to true nuclear flashpoint? And what does history teach us about this path?
Well, let me first thank you for inviting me and thank Jeffrey for that talk. And there's nothing hypocritical about what you've done. Um, my dear friend Dan Ellsberg was in a similar position. And if we want to warn about the threat of nuclear war, nobody did that more eloquently or passionately than Dan did. It was just the second anniversary of his passing, and we miss his voice at this point. But he wrote about it. He wrote a book subtitled Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner, Doomsday Machine. And I was the insider, the leading expert on command and control of nuclear weapons, till he had his epiphany and realized what was right and wrong. You ask about nuclear weapons. Well, like all of us, I'm sure, I'm hoping that this ceasefire is for real. The last I saw, neither Israel nor Iran had actually confirmed it, but it makes sense that people would want to back off where we are because where we're at is so dangerous and so crazy right now. Um, so I'm hoping that this could actually be happening and could change some of the paradigms and might open up the possibility for diplomacy on a global scale. I know diplomacy has become a very dirty word uh, in recent years, certainly during the Biden administration, and now again during the Trump administration. Who's going to trust the United States in any kind of negotiations after what we've seen more recently? But I look at some of the statements, talking about crazy, when Dmitry Medvedev, a top Russian official, said the other day that a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. I mean, that's exactly the opposite of what the world needs. It was actually Sergei Lavrov who just said something much more on mark. He said, if every country interprets the right to self-defense set by the UN Charter as, quote, I decide for myself when to use this right, and I don't want to look back at the Charter, there will obviously be no world order, but complete chaos. Um, it seems odd coming from a Russian top official to be saying that, but he's certainly accurate. So the situation we're in, uh, less than 2 weeks ago, Tulsi Gabbard issued a warning. I hope everybody's seen it, and if not, you should look it up. It was a 3.5 minute video that she recorded, at least part of, from Hiroshima. She apparently went to Hiroshima after the meeting in Singapore, and she talked about the bomb that was dropped in 1945, 80 years ago. And she said it was a tiny bomb compared to the bombs we have now. But she said the world is closer to nuclear war than it's ever been since 1945. And she talked about the effects that would have, the annihilation, and she talked about nuclear winter and what nuclear winter means, what people don't understand anymore about nuclear weapons. And that's been one of my frustrations because since the end of the Cold War, that people have gone to sleep on the nuclear threat, even though it's so enormous now. The movie Oppenheimer, as terrible as it was in its treatment of the atomic bombings in 1945, the decision to drop the bomb, uh, in other ways, really warned people about the dangers of nuclear war and the insanity of that. And I was surprised at how many people saw that movie. Shortly after it came out, I asked the class I was teaching how many of my students had seen it. Maybe 50 students in the class. I expected 3 or 4 hands to go up. 80% of the students had seen it, and that was a wake-up call. Plus Dan's poignant warnings before he passed away. So the question you're asking, um, what's going on now with the Israeli and now U.S. attacks on Iran effectively means the end of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the irrelevance of the IAEA, the obsolescence of the United Nations. Instead, we're really on the verge of a new era in which, marked by the law of the jungle. Um, we look at the situations. We've had countries invading other countries in ways that the United States, of course, did it over and over and over and over again. Vietnam was the war of my generation. When McNamara came into my class, he told my students that he accepted that 3.8 million Vietnamese died in that war. When I was in Hanoi little more than a year ago, the Vietnamese leaders told me that the figure they now use is 5 million Vietnamese died in that war. So, and then we had Afghanistan, and we were lied into Iraq, much the same way we were lied into the lies that have surrounded this invasion. As Jeffrey was saying, there was no, Iran was not building a bomb. American intelligence and intelligence everywhere but Israel had known that Iran was not building a bomb, and that the U.S. was saying it would probably take them 2 years before they had the ability to deliver one, even if they did dash for a bomb. But Netanyahu lied, said this was an existential threat and it was imminent, and Trump doubled down on that. Uh, so, but so we've seen this going on everywhere. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and Putin's threats, implied threats to use nuclear weapons. Russia at least had some justification for doing so, given a NATO expansion and other threats, but it was still the wrong thing to do in this age. Uh, the Israel and Iran, absurd. India and Pakistan coming close to war again recently. The situation over Taiwan. What Hegseth said is that we should end the war in Ukraine so the U.S. can focus on the real enemy, and that's China. And we know that that was the attitude in the Biden administration. He surrounded himself with 18 top advisors from the Center for New American Security, and those were mostly the China hawks. It goes back to Obama and Hillary Clinton, but that's really what the big game is now for a lot of these war planners. Uh, so it's still, the world is still very, very dangerous. And if we look at in terms of nuclear threats, what we're seeing now is that all 9 nuclear powers are modernizing their nuclear arsenals, which means making them not only more efficient, but much more lethal. We see that almost all of them, and probably all of them, are going to reverse the trend, and they're going to expand their nuclear arsenals. Back in 1986, I used to always take my students every year for 25 years to the Atomic Bomb Museum in Hiroshima. And I used to find myself writing down the same information year after year from one of the displays that said by 1985, the world had accumulated the equivalent of 1.47 million Hiroshima bombs. What a mad species we are, and so many suicidal tendencies. Um, so we were up to 70,000 nuclear weapons by 1986. Now we finally got that down to 14,000, under 14,000, which is still enough to end life on the planet several times over. But at least we're going the right direction. What we see now is where every people are expanding again, expanding the nuclear arsenals. The Brits expanding their Trident weapons by 40%. The Chinese, who used to rely on a very limited deterrent with 200 nuclear weapons, now seem to be up to maybe 600, with goals, at least the Pentagon is arguing, up to 1,500 by 2035. Um, but this seems to be what everybody's doing. And that's exactly what Project 2025 called for. The U.S. expanding its nuclear arsenal, making it more usable, as Trump said. He said it during the first term. What's the point of having nuclear bombs if we can't use them? To sane people, that means get rid of them. To Donald Trump, it means make them more usable. And so he did in his nuclear posture review. Talk about Trump in that regard, since I'm just touching on it. When Trump was briefed on how much the U.S. had cut its nuclear arsenal, his response was, we should increase America's nuclear arsenal tenfold. To which Rex Tillerson called him a fucking moron. But he's more than a fucking moron. He's as we know, a fascist threat, a warmonger, very, very dangerous, who wants the Nobel Peace Prize. I should know about that because I nominated Nihon Dankyo for the Nobel Peace Prize, and I was part of their delegation in Oslo. Uh, the so the world is going the wrong way. We're increasing the nuclear arsenals. And you look at the people who have called for having access to nuclear weapons. You've got Ishiba, the Japanese prime minister. Japan has been the most anti-nuclear country in the world for a long time. Ishiba, right before he took office, said that he wants to see an Asian NATO and Japan should have access to its own nuclear weapons. We know Japan has a vast stockpile of plutonium and could develop nuclear weapons. We say they're a screwdriver twist away. South Korea, 73% of the South Korean population in the polls say they want their own nuclear weapons. Zelensky has called for Ukraine having its own nuclear weapons. Macron has said he wants to spread France's nuclear umbrella over Europe if the Europeans want that. And then you've got Merz in Germany welcoming that. You've got the Austrians welcoming that. You've got Tusk in Poland welcoming that. I mean, we look at where we are, and the reason why, I mean, all of us were opposed to Iran getting a nuclear weapon because I knew that if Iran got a nuclear weapon, which it wasn't close to, but if they did get a nuclear weapon, then Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Turkey would all follow suit. The last thing we need in that tinderbox in the Middle East is everybody having access to nuclear weapons. But we're on the verge globally of nuclear anarchy. And so, because the lesson, what North Korea said after the U.S. overthrew Saddam Hussein, said the one mistake that Iraq made was not to have nuclear weapons. If Iraq had developed nuclear weapons, then the United States could not have invaded. And we see we've attacked Iran, we've overthrew Iraq. Haven't attacked North Korea because the lesson maybe is accurate, but the wrong lesson, the most dangerous lesson. And we could see that kind of nuclear anarchy, given what's going on now and this kind of new law of the jungle. So we need to step back and we need global leadership and we need some statesmanship and we need some people who speak for the planet instead of wanting to make their own countries great again. And that's sadly the moment we're at. So Tulsi Gabbard's warning was not only eloquent, it was incredibly timely. And she said correctly that we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been. And there's so many ways in which that could play out. And we must intervene globally to prevent that from
Thank
happening.
you. Thank you, Dr. Kuznick, for your insight. This is and I, again, I'm really interested to hear from Dr. Azodi, who's also an Iranian American. And oftentimes, when there's so much propaganda and we really get lost, in legacy media and corporate media, telling us what they want us to hear to reel us into another war. I think it's extremely important to hear from Iranian American voices on this issue. So it is with my with absolute pleasure and honor that I do introduce to you Dr. Azodi, who specializes in international security, Iranian politics, and nuclear non-proliferation. He has worked at Princeton's program on science and global security and at the Wilson Center. His work has been featured in Foreign Policy, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Arms Control Association, and quoted by the New York Times, Washington Post, and Der Spiegel. He is the author of the forthcoming book, Iran and the Bomb. Dr. Azodi, how is the crisis being perceived inside of Iran from both the government and the people? Is there still room now for negotiation, or has that been closed off? And how close is Iran to developing nuclear weapons should the regime stay? Because I think that part of what's happening right now is also this push for a regime change in Iran, which I firmly believe as an Iranian American must come from inside of Iran, not from plants that the US places in spaces where they can have complete geopolitical control over, right? So take us through that and what's happening right now at home.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us and good evening, everyone. Let me start by your third question, then I'll answer the second question, and I'll answer the first one. On the question of regime change, there is no single historical case that I know of that aerial campaigns have led to a regime change in a foreign country. Yugoslavia was bombed by NATO, and yet there was no regime change in Yugoslavia. Iraq in 1990s was bombed for years by the US, Great Britain, and we did not have a regime change until 2003, when we actually deployed troops on the ground in Iraq, which successfully toppled Saddam's regime. We tried to do a social engineering, create a democracy in Iraq, but Iraq is whatever it is today. Iran is a far more difficult meal, if you will, for the US. It is much larger. It has a much larger population. It is extremely nationalistic and at the same time wary of foreign interventions. Iraq was a country that was really made by Great Britain of 3 provinces of the Ottoman Empire. Iran, on the other hand, is a country that has been sitting there for 3,000 years. It has been it is a nation state. So I'm very skeptical of the US being able to do a regime change. My concern is that the Israelis trying to do what I call, or some other people have called, the Syrification of Iran. That means that to weaken the state and cripple the state so it cannot function properly as a state, so that every once in a while, depending on the mood of the Prime Minister of Israel or his or her whims, they can attack the country, bomb somewhere, and come back. That's my concern. So that's for the third question of regime change. In terms of how far Iran is from the bomb, if we had this discussion a week ago, I would tell you that based on what we know from the IAEA's latest report, Iran has or had enough fissile material for 9 to 10 nuclear weapons should it decide to go for the bomb. This doesn't mean that Iran is a weak, and Iran's breakout time is a week to 10 days. This doesn't mean that Iran is 10 days from a bomb. Iran would require more time to assemble a nuclear weapon, right? Have the implosion device and put it on the warhead, put it on the missile that can be delivered to the target. But we know now, as our other speakers pointed out, that Iran does not have a political decision or a structured program to develop nuclear weapons. There were a few reports that suggested that the Iranians were exploring shortcuts to a nuclear weapon so they can kind of shorten the amount of time that they would need to have a nuclear device. But again, I do want to emphasize that our intelligence community agrees with the IAEA's Director General that Iran does not have a structured program for nuclear weapons. This is something that, there were studies conducted in the early 2000s, but everything was, shelved and put aside in the fall of 2003. So I hope that answers the second question. And what is the general mood in Tehran? Right now, as we speak, and we are thankfully headed for a ceasefire, Tehran is under severe bombardment from the air. This is what I've been hearing from a lot of people in Tehran. I believe that the Israelis are taking advantage of this window of opportunity that they have, and they've been attacking Iran. They've been attacking Tehran and other cities severely. But still, the people are excited that there's an end to the hostilities. We have to keep in mind that since the end of the Iran-Iraq war from 1980 to 1988, where Iranian cities were subjected to a lot of, I should say, Western provided ballistic missiles, French fighter aircrafts, etc., and even with pilots at times, Iranians have not witnessed attack over their cities, violation of their airspace, etc., etc. For the younger generation, I mean, people like me, I'm not old, but I do remember the Iran-Iraq war. I was a child growing up there. I vividly remember the attacks on Tehran. But the younger generation, the Gen Z, if you will, does not remember that, does not have any connection to those days. So for them, this is a whole new experience that they're going through. A lot of people, similar to what happened during the Iran-Iraq war, have fled Tehran to the northern part of the country where the Caspian Sea is. People have lost their loved ones. Something that is missing from the media is the coverage of the Iranian casualties, civilian casualties. I personally know someone who was a yoga instructor, and she was killed in the first night of the attack, along with her entire family. So, I mean, and I can tell you for sure that she was not an IRGC commander, she was not connected to the regime, and she was not a nuclear scientist either. She was like any other, a young person trying to have a decent life. And this is something that is unfortunately being marginalized by the media. How do people feel? They're afraid. They are stuck between a regime that oppresses them and a country, or two countries, I should say, that have been attacking them. And I do want to emphasize here, and Professor Kuznick, please correct me if I'm wrong, Iran is the only country that in history that has been subjected to attacks by two nuclear weapon states at the same time. The United States and Israel both have nuclear weapons. Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and yet it has been attacked by them. And the other thing that I do want to point out, and I'll stop here, I don't want to talk too much, is that the other thing that is missing from the media is that nobody is discussing the fact that the US, as the leader, the so-called leader of the rules-based international system, violated international law by attacking nuclear facilities that were under the safeguards of the IAEA. That is a flagrant violation of the additional protocol of the Geneva Convention. But yet, because we are a superpower, we do what we can, we get away with it, and nobody can say anything to us.
And something you touched upon, first of all, my heart goes out to your family in Iran. I think during these times, I've found lots of comfort in just having conversation with Iranian Americans, others who are going through the same trauma that we're going through. I asked my family the other day, I said, I don't know what's worse, living through the war, being on our own soil and witnessing what happens, or being far away from it, not really knowing what to do for our people, knowing what we know. And I just want to say I hold you close to my heart, Dr. Azodi, and we will
Thank you. You
you
too.
go. Yeah. So this brings us to our next segment, which is where do we go from here? And a part of why we organized this call essentially was just to make sure that we talk about, we grab the information that we need and put that into a call to action, which is what we're going to be doing at the end of this call. So there's many of you, there's about 215 people on this call right now. And I'm urging everyone to please stick around because we do have a call to action that we're going to ask for every single person here once the speakers are done to take part in, because we have a lot of work to do. This ceasefire is extremely fragile. What we have seen also is that Israel does not abide by the law, international law. So at any moment, this could be broken, right? So the next speaker I want to highlight here is a dear friend whose heart bleeds for Iran as much as we Iranian Americans. And long ago, he came to me and said, Hanieh, what do we do? Right. And every day, that's our question. How do we get involved? What do we do? And so it brings me nothing but great pleasure to introduce to you Khury Petersen-Smith, who is the Michael Ratner Middle East Fellow at IPS and co-director of the New Internationalism Project. He researches U.S. empire, militarism, and migration, and has worked with movement resisting U.S. intervention from the Middle East to the Pacific. He co-authored the 2023 Black Voices in Ceasefire statement signed by over 6,000 Black activists, scholars, and artists. Khury, what role must the grassroots movement play to stop this war? And how do we build a bottom-up peace movement that connects with global justice efforts now that we're finding ourselves in this moment?
Thank you so much, Hanieh. I have thoughts on the question. I have to begin with just some gratitude, particularly for Dr. Azodi. Your professional insights as a scholar and your personal insights as well. These are things that we're not hearing in the mainstream media. These are the voices that we don't hear, along with yours, Hanieh. So I just real gratitude to Rootsaction for elevating these voices, along, of course, with Dr. Kuznick's historical insights and Brother Jeffrey's insights as well. I'm really grateful for this event and to be part of it. And if I could just say a word before we get into the question, or maybe it's kind of related to what we do, just a word about this news that we sort of got before this event started. And I know there's a lot of questions in the chat about it. I'm sure we'll get into it in the conversation. And I'll just say this. I mean, obviously, it's fresh, and we'll see kind of what's confirmed. But before this formal conversation began, Hanieh and I were talking on the phone, and she pointed out, this is like a reality show. And I will remind us that our president in this country has had many jobs, but the one thing that he was successful as was a media guy. I mean, that this is his work, is to kind of keep you on the edge of your seat. The way that he left the G7 meeting and said he was going to Washington to work on something important. I mean, this whole thing has been a kind of a media story for him, which is especially appalling given how high the stakes are for the people of Iran and people of Palestine and elsewhere. So I just offer that to say, we will see what happens, but what he wants is for us to be on our phones, to be glued to the TV. And it's a good thing that we are engaging here in this conversation, and we should engage, but we should engage on our terms, not on his. So I'll offer that. Okay, so that said, before getting to where we are today, I do want to start back with a couple of things from almost 25 years ago, because of course over the course of this week and last week, I've been reflecting on the lead up to and the U.S. invasion of Iraq. The parallels are striking, as Jeffrey and Peter and Sina all spoke to, and I'm reminded of two things. One is something that the head of the Arab League at the time said right before the U.S. invasion in 2002. He said, if the U.S. invades Iraq, it is opening the gates of hell. meaning that it is setting in motion a set of things well beyond the US's control. And that turned out to be painfully true. And people of Iraq in particular paid the price, but many people paid the price. Here we are nearly 25 years later, and we have a more reckless president, frankly, with more power. And again, taking actions that have consequences well beyond what Washington controls, whatever they think they have control over. The other thing to say, it's worth saying that there was a popular saying in Washington at that time, in the lead up to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which is that everybody wants to go to Baghdad, meaning everybody wants to invade Iraq, but the real men want to go to Tehran. I'll leave to you to consider, the violence of that, the kind of gendered nature of that statement. But this is my point in bringing this up, is to say, this has been, for some elements in Washington, a U.S. attack that is nearly 25 years in the making. And I feel that's important because part of the conversation I think has been wrong is that this notion that Israel is sort of dragging the U.S. into this war kind of against U.S. will, or kind of against U.S. interests. And the fact is that militarism in the United States, unfortunately, is really part of the DNA. And that's really what when we get to the question of where we're at right now in this country and what we do, I think that's extremely important. I just want to look at the past couple of weeks. I mean, 2 weeks ago, for months now, there has been this horrendous, highly militarized assault on our immigrant communities in this country. 2 weeks ago, the federal government deployed the National Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles as part of their repression to kind of make this attack on immigrants possible. Then we had a military parade in Washington, and then we had the U.S. join Israel's war on Iran. And so there's been a series of highly militarized events domestically that I think kind of led to or fed into or provided a context for the U.S. is joining this attack on Iran abroad. But the opposite is also true, actually. These past 2+ decades of the so-called war on terror, including the U.S. invasion and occupation of Afghanistan and of Iraq, and the various military operations all over the Middle East and Africa and elsewhere in the world, that unleashed incredible violence in those regions, but that violence didn't stay there. It also came back to the United States. And in fact, I think that now so many Americans are reeling from the kind of authoritarianism with which Trump is operating. We should understand that a part of that story of how the White House became so strong is a story of militarism abroad, actually. That it was about the executive consolidating its power to wage war abroad that then gets deployed against us here at home, in addition to our brothers and sisters around the world. My point being, what is happening in Iran, and I think it's obvious for everybody on this call, but I want to say it, so we can say it to people across this country. What's happening to people in Iran and the people in Palestine, let's not forget about this genocide, this ongoing genocide in Gaza, right? And the people in Lebanon and Syria and Yemen, right? What's happening to them, and really the violence that this country is waging and supporting against them, is important because their lives matter, just like the lives of people all around the world matter, right? However, if for whatever reason that is not compelling enough for Americans to throw down, and oppose what's going on, I hope it is compelling to know that that violence will not stay in Iran. It will not stay in Palestine. It will be deployed against us here also. That is, it's not just rhetorical that our fates are bound together. It's real. And I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it. So I'll end on this, which is the good news. The good news is actually that more and more Americans are seeing it. Prior to this assault on Iran, there has been this 20-month-long genocide in Gaza that has been catastrophic for the people of Palestine. It has also resulted in something profound in the United States, which is an outpouring of sympathy and solidarity with Palestinians. And that is a huge deal, because so much is invested into making sure that Americans don't care about people in the Middle East, right? And people elsewhere around the world. And we're seeing that actually humanity broke through. That's important. At the same time, now that Trump is in, there is an emerging movement for immigrant rights and against authoritarianism. We saw it in the No Kings Day protests. We saw it in the Hands Off protests. That is extremely important, and it's crucial that we make sure that anti-militarism is central to that, and not just anti-militarism in terms of militarism deployed here, militarism deployed around the world, to our family around the world. I'll end there. Thank you.
Ooh, I wish we had hours for this call. You said a couple of things here that I just want to highlight again. At the same time that our attention has moved from everything else now to Iran and U.S. and Israel. Israel is still killing children searching for food. And something to highlight here is that, our struggles are intertwined, right? And so with that said, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart to every single one of the speakers here for showing up tonight in solidarity with Iran, the Iranian community, and to speak about peace and where we go from here. Dr. Kuznick, Khury Petersen-Smith, Jeffrey Sterling, and Dr. Azodi, it has been an absolute honor. What I do want to do is ask every single one of you to stay because we do have a call to action. But if our speakers have to log off, please do. I know you have many interviews happening, and things are moving fast. So hopefully we'll circle back again soon and have another event. I also do want to highlight that this Teach and Network event is an initiative that has been launched by Rootsaction to provide tools for organizers across the country to be able to organize their own teach-in using the list of our esteemed speakers that are listed on the website. And Ryan Black, my colleague, has been posting the website in our chat. Unfortunately, we won't have time to do Q&A, but what I do want to say is that to Khury's point, the outpour of solidarity with the people of Iran, with the people of Palestine has been so overwhelming, right? And it has been so overwhelming that there's a bipartisan resolution that is being introduced by Thomas Massie of Kentucky and Ro Khanna of California. And we want to talk about how we're going to be able to rally folks to sign on or urge their Congress members to sign on to this resolution that is calling for there to be a block on unauthorized U.S. military forces and the war powers, promoting the war powers resolution, that the President of the United States has to get permission from Congress to attack, right? So I'm going to use this call to action here for every single one of you. We made it as easy as possible. There's also two bills that have been introduced by Senator Sanders and by Senator Tim Kaine. One is to reassert the congressional authority, and then the other one is the No War with Iran Act. Dr. Azodi, I just saw your hand up. Did you have a comment?
Very quickly, the Iranian foreign minister just tweeted or posted on X what he says, and I quote, as Iran has repeatedly made clear, Israel launched war on Iran, not the other way around. As of now, there is, quote, there is no agreement on any ceasefire or cessation of military operations. However, provided that the Israeli regime stops its illegal aggression against the Iranian people no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, we have no intention to continue our response afterwards. The final decision on the ceasefire of our military operations will be made later. And he tweeted this at 4:15 a.m. Tehran time. So I get if I want to translate it into from Araqchi's English to simple English, I think he says that we have an agreement, but he doesn't want to say that we have an agreement.
Right.
So that's my take.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a passive aggressive way of talking about it. So,
pretty much.
Thank you for sharing that information, which is what is so important here in this moment, is that our work continues as the grassroots movement builders and on the ground working towards peace and justice. we have to continue the work, and we have to put the pressure on our Congress members to join Representative Massey and Ro Khanna's bill, the War Powers Resolution Act, in addition to Senator Sanders and Tim Kaine's reasserting the congressional authority and No War with Iran Act. So what you're going to see in the link that I shared with you is a page that guides you to what you need to do exactly to be able to make these calls to your Congress members. And Ryan, please do correct me if I am wrong, because I know you and Bill have already taken this action, but you're going to enter your information in the spaces where you see blank. And what you do is, as soon as you hit submit or click to begin your call, this would automatically take you to your member of Congress, your senator first, and then once you're done with that, it'll take you directly to your member of Congress so you can leave him a message. And we have put this script together for you. The very top, you have your script for calling your senators. At the very bottom, you have your script for calling your House members. A ceasefire is not enough. We have to ensure that the U.S. moving forward is beholden to the international law, right? Otherwise, as Khury Patterson said on this call so eloquently, they can bring the war back home to us if we don't stop this madness. So I just want to put everybody on mute. Please do take a moment to take this call to action, and you're more than welcome to log off if you have other things to do. I do want to, again, extend my gratitude to all of our speakers, Dr. Azodi, Khury Pattersen-Smith, my esteemed colleague, Jeffrey Sterling, Peter Kuznick. I also do want to give a special shout out to Bill Lackemacher, who does all of our back-end support for us for these wonderful calls that we host, and Ryan Black, who's with us tonight, helping us with the call to action and moving the chat and the conversation in the chat. I will leave my email for any of you who want to get involved with the Diffuse Nuclear War Initiative. My name is Hanieh Jodat, and just put in the chat if you have any problems with this call to action so we can address it before we log off. Great. I'm seeing that people are telling me that they have contacted their senators and Congress members. And again, the outpour of solidarity towards the people of Iran has just been so overwhelming. And I just thank you, every single one of you. So with that said, we can end the call. You all have access to the page, the link. I will share it one more time. And go ahead and circulate this link to all of your friends, family members who want to be a part of something great, which is stopping this war machine. And with that said, I thank you for being here, and I wish you a beautiful rest of your evening. Have a good night.